best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the fundamental rights of the people of the Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation.
Jerry Agar for Ezra Levant. We've been telling you about how the chief of the Standing Buffalo Reserve was ousted by his people, but won't leave the job. Sun's Lisa Mrazek has been following the story. She's in Regina. Lisa, welcome, and bring us up to speed on the story.
Yeah, for sure, Jerry. There's a lot of background here, so I'll do my best to kind of catch you up. So basically, they held an election, the Standing Buffalo First Nation held an election on March 16th. Now, I actually drove up there on the Saturday to cover that election. So just to give you an idea as to where this is all taking place, the Standing Buffalo First Nation is made up of about 440 or so residents on the reserve, and it's about 70 kilometers northeast of Regina, so not too far. So they held this election, and they actually had about 180 band members come out to vote. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but considering the fact that, you know, this 440 people on the reserve accounts for people under the age of 18 who aren't eligible to vote, so they had a fairly significant turnout. So a majority of the people are really hungry for change. They want to see new leadership. So for the first time, they actually elected a female chief, her name Roberta Soy-Washte, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But so that's so she was elected. They elected new councillors, so men, women, councillors of all ages. They seemed very excited. There was lots of hugging and you know, tears of joy. People seemed elated and really ready for a fresh start. Now, just to give you a quick background here, the reason the election was actually called was because former Chief Roger Redmond and his councillors have found out to be making these exorbitant salaries. They weren't being responsible or accountable for their for their salaries, for their travel, their per diems, and other band expenses. And so the Senate, which is actually a body of elected elders who are appointed so that they can actually arbitrate and mediate in these sorts of issues in the reserve, they actually found this out. They called a sit-in saying, you know, okay, chief and councillors, you guys can actually have an opportunity to go over your expenses and be accountable for them. They have refused to go to those meetings last November. So in January, the Senate, who actually has the power and authority according to their according to their Election Act, has the power and authority to impeach the chief and council. So that's what they did in January. They ousted Chief Roger Redmond, his councillors, all but one. That's the whistleblower. We'll get to her in a bit. Yeah. Ousted all of them, called the election on March 16th. So that's sort of putting you up to speed, yeah.
All right, and then now you have spoken to the incoming chief.
Yes, I have. I spoke to Chief Roberta. Again, she was, the night of the election, was extremely excited to really get this reserve on track, saying there's a lot of really good people on the reserve. They have a lot of potential, a lot of young people who are really eager to work and to move this reserve forward. But when they actually went to the band office the day after the election, former chief and about 20 of his relatives were there, barring them from entering the band office. There was some pushing and shoving. There were words exchanged that she wouldn't repeat. So she was quite frustrated by this. They knew they would have some, you know, challenges trying to get in and assume their new roles and responsibilities, but she says it's all worth it. Now, I also talked to the original whistleblower, that's Stella Isnana, and she was the one to actually go to the Senate and talk about some of the financial mismanagement. I'll let you hear a little bit more of what she had to say about that.
Never approved of their expenses. I didn't sign their checks when they got these big amounts, and I just didn't approve. And I told them, I said, you guys shouldn't be getting this money because you don't attend those meetings, and I don't know how you ever got this amount of dollars, but it's not right. And not submitting your receipts when you don't go to a meeting, you don't have receipts, so they didn't submit anything. So that's not accountability. You got to be accountable for the money that you're taking.
Well, there's 440 people, and it sounds like big city politics and intrigue, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
All right, so, and you've also spoken to the incoming chief.
Yes, I have spoken to her as well. So I actually met them in Fort Qu'Appelle. It's just kind of a small town which is near the reserve. They actually didn't even want to meet me on the reserve, so if that gives you any indication as to how things are going on the First Nation, the situation can't be good that they didn't, even want me to travel out there. So anyway, so they met me near a nearby town. We talked a little bit about, some of the challenges that they've been facing. It's crazy, Jerry, because they aren't even able to collect a salary. So a majority of the band members have voted them in to assume office, to take over the accounting, take over the band office, and they aren't even collecting a salary. So former Chief Roger Redmond and his councillors are still collecting salary. They haven't left the band office. They're, again, still not letting the newly elected chief and her councillors into the band office, so they still have all control over the checkbook, and they're collecting their exorbitant salaries. And I guess we should probably throw to a clip as well. So again, I asked Roberta about some of their options because, of course, there's challenges. She spoke in very general terms, the fact that they're, exploring all of their options. I wanted her to get a little more specific, but all she basically said was they're also exploring legal options, trying to potentially get a lawyer. The former chief has basically said he's not going to leave office until they get a court injunction. So that's another thing that they're looking at. So I'll let you hear a little bit more about what she had to say about some future options, including the idea of a First Nations ombudsman. Take a listen.
I think that a First Nations ombudsman would be a great avenue for First Nations who are under Custom Election Act. Because of, that is their governing law, when you're a Custom Election Act. However, when you have conflict between the old or the former chief and council and the newly elected chief and council, that would be a great avenue to explore for First Nations.
Well, it's unfortunate. She's the chief and she seems to have been rendered powerless. But speaking of power and of consequences, what has happened, Lisa, what's the cost been to your whistleblower?
Well, basically, again, she lost her job after she kind of blew the whistle on the former chief. She went to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, showed some of the figures to them. They actually gave him the National Teddy Award, which is, of course, given out for excessive spending because he actually makes an equivalent salary of an off-reserve salary of $317,000, Jerry. That's more than the Prime Minister of Canada. So after basically blowing the whistle on that and, giving national spotlight on the reserve, which, of course, is something that the chief didn't want to see happen. Of course, he's denying all of those allegations, but again, she has no job, she's not getting a salary, she has a 1-year-old daughter, so she's she has car payments, house payments, so she's basically, in a poverty situation like so many of the people on the reserve, and this was supposed to be such a great time for the reserve to really bring some of their people out of poverty, get them more money for job training, for post-secondary education, and now because the former chief and council is still in power, none of that funding is getting to where it needs to go. All
right, and she was telling us how tough it's been for her.
Yes, we'll throw to that clip of Stella talking a little bit about that. It's really the right thing to do. She wanted to do the right thing.
It's frustrating that he's still there, that he still wants that recognition, and he's accused me of wanting power. He's accused me of wanting to be chief, and just to show him I didn't run for chief, and it's not me to be power hungry. It's not me to be wanting all that money and that recognition. I just want to help my people. That's all I want to do.
Well, good for her. And Lisa, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jerry.